I'm with Naomi Kahn from Regavim. Now, Naomi, what is Regavim?
Regavim it's now an 18-year-old civil society organization. We're a nonprofit dedicated to investigating land use policy from the ground up, protecting Israel's land resources and all of the resources, our national resources that arise from land use policy.
Now, recently you put out a press release that a Palestinian municipality has been born. Tell us a bit more about that.
So the Palestinian Authority is essentially flexing its muscles, and it's a political ploy in response to an enforcement action by the State of Israel. The State of Israel, the IDF's civil administration, recently demolished two illegal Palestinian Authority structures in Area C, the area under full Israeli jurisdiction, not only in Area C, but inside a closed military zone bordering on an internationally created non-construction area, a nature reserve. The Palestinian Authority has been building aggressively in these areas against the law, against international treaty. And finally, the State of Israel actually enforced the law against two of these structures. And in response, the Palestinian Authority declared a new municipality inside Israeli-controlled territory, completely illegally, and in a very cynical, I dare you sort of a move to the State of Israel.
And what do they call this municipality? And is that important, even the name?
The name has no meaning whatsoever. It's simply invented. They've called it Kisra. And we have no idea how they invent these things. Some of them are taken from local ruins from ancient times that are in the vicinity, and they try to co-opt Jewish history that way. They try to redefine archaeological sites as Palestinian when in fact they have absolutely no Arab connection whatsoever, certainly not Palestinian. They are sites of Jewish history dotted through this area, which is south of Hebron. And so they sometimes co-opt names. This one we haven't been able to figure out exactly where they invented it from. Be that as it may, it's a collection of illegal structures in a closed military zone under Israeli jurisdiction by international law. So the general region is actually known today in international parlance as Masafar Yatta. Masafar coming from the Hebrew and Arabic word, which means outlying areas, the outskirts essentially, of a larger community, which is Yatta. Yatta is a very ancient and very large Arab community in Area A, under full Palestinian Authority control. It's not far from there. And in fact, most of the people who are living in what is now called Masafar Yatta, these illegal encampments in Area C, are homeowners. They own homes and live in Yatta itself. So, for example, in 2022, when some of these cases came to the Supreme Court of Israel, the documentation presented by the Arabs themselves who were claiming rights to this territory in Area C, Masafar Yatta, proved actually themselves that they own homes and are registered as residents of areas under Palestinian Authority control, Yatta in particular.
So this is a political move, is it?
Oh, certainly. It's a very, very cynical political move, and it's part of a much larger plan that was laid out very clearly and very publicly by the Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority in 2009, Salam Fayyad, so it's known as the Fayyad Plan, and he declared that they would simply be creating facts on the ground in order to overtake all of the property placed under Israeli jurisdiction in order to create a Palestinian state. And they've been doing it systematically ever since. Israel has more or less not responded because it's become an international issue. Much of this illegal construction is funded by the European Union itself, or the West Bank Protection Consortium, which is 4 European countries that fund this illegal construction that is clearly strategic and political and does not answer any actual housing needs for people who own homes in Palestinian Authority-controlled areas.
It is a firing zone area. What's the history of this area?
So all of this region was declared a closed military IDF training ground in 1980 after a full survey to make sure there was no private property there were no people living there, and it was declared a closed military zone in 1980. So this land was considered wasteland not only under the Jordanian regime and under the British mandate, but also during the Ottoman Empire. It has a very specific categorization of mawat, which means dead or wasteland, and all of these areas were fully surveyed and investigated for private ownership, and when it was deemed that there were no privately owned properties there and no people living there, the IDF set them aside as active training grounds. The Air Force practiced there, all the ground forces do maneuvers there. So all of these are active live fire training grounds, and the Palestinian Authority very, very cynically has moved civilians into them to take over the territory, and they don't care when people get hurt. There are actually men, women, and children living in active firing zones in these areas for cynical political purposes. They're put there by the Palestinian Authority. They are supported by the Europeans, all in an attempt to simply redraw the map and create a Palestinian state without any negotiation, without any regard whatsoever for Israel's security needs.
I imagine it all looks official and all looks great, and then Israel come along and want to knock it down because it's illegal, and that's when the media start focusing on it.
Oh, there's going to be a circus. There's going to be a massive international outcry that Israel is dismantling a Palestinian Authority municipality. The fact that it is A, on land in Israeli control under international law, and B, in a closed military zone, and C, bordering on the nature reserve to which the Palestinians agreed that they would protect as a non-construction zone. None of this seems to matter. The Europeans have absolutely, completely trampled the agreements to which they are signatories that limit the Palestinian Authority's activity and development to areas A and B, and are actually actively encouraging and participating in Palestinian Authority annexation of the areas under Israeli control.
Is the Israeli government in some ways to blame for this, for not jumping on it quick enough?
Absolutely. And that's why Regavim exists, essentially. We're a watchdog. When we stand, we see what's happening on the ground, and we kind of bark at the heels and snap at the heels of the government of Israel. And they're the ones that we are targeting with our activism, because it is the Israeli government that is responsible for maintaining law and order, first of all, and control of these land resources, and making sure that they're used not only legally but responsibly and sanely, so that there's something, A, to negotiate about in the future, and B, somewhere for people to live in a decent manner. So the government of Israel has buckled under international pressure and has been afraid to stare down the European sponsors of all of this illegal annexation, and it is to the tremendous detriment of everyone living in the area, both to the people who are being moved into active firing zones and to people who want a peacefully negotiated resolution to the political situation. This sort of illegal activity and illegal annexation simply pushes the entire region to confrontation and to violence, and makes the negotiated resolution and division of the territory less and less likely.
Who are some of these NGOs, and is Europe actually funding some of this?
Europe's funding all of it, either directly or indirectly, either by directly paying for construction and or by indirectly paying these anti-Zionist Israeli non-profits. They're not really non-profits, they're actually foreign government representatives, but the EU is paying places like Bimkom, B'Tselem, Breaking the Silence, a whole host of Israeli anti-Zionist pro-Palestinian NGOs. They're also providing legal support to defend all of this illegal activity when it actually comes to court. And they are also paying the Bedouin to populate these illegal outposts. So none of this would be possible without direct and indirect European funding and support.
This doesn't bring peace, really, does it?
No, it brings war. It's clear that it brings only conflict, loss of life, tragedy to all sides.
Is the PA or Palestinians often building on other lands that they don't own themselves without permission?
We have documented over 91,000 illegal Palestinian Authority structures in Area C, the area under Israeli control. What's even more shocking is that the areas that are under Palestinian Authority control, that were created under the Oslo framework in order to enable the Palestinian society to develop and to tend to its own needs and to its own future, over 70% of that territory is empty and undeveloped. And the Palestinian Authority uses the massive resources that it receives from foreign donations to annex Area C, and completely neglects the areas already under its control in A and B, where it has enough land resources to solve its own needs for the next 100 years if they use them wisely. But they're not interested really in improving the lives of the people under Palestinian Authority jurisdiction. They're only interested in taking away land from the State of Israel. So that's where all the resources go, into illegal construction in Area C.
For anybody who doesn't understand the situation, what is Area A, Area B, and Area C?
Okay, so starting from the beginning. In 1993, 1995, and thereafter, the Israeli government negotiated a division of territory known as the Oslo Framework, the Oslo Accords, creating a Palestinian Authority that would handle all civilian affairs for over 95% of the Arabs living in Judea and Samaria. That means that 95, even more, probably 98% of all of the Palestinians didn't have to have any contact whatsoever with the State of Israel. And the Palestinian Authority could begin moving towards statehood, autonomy of some sort. Not necessarily a full state, but something that would enable autonomous self-rule. So the area of Judea and Samaria, the contested territories that were repatriated by Israel in 1967, were divided into 3 zones: Area A, Area B, and Area C. Area A is under full Palestinian Authority control, including being policed by a Palestinian army. Area B is all civilian matters. That includes construction, infrastructure, education, healthcare, social welfare, everything in areas A and B are under Palestinian Authority control. The only difference is that Area B more or less borders on Israeli territory, and therefore peripheral security control was maintained by the State of Israel. Area C was left under full Israeli jurisdiction. So everything that happens there is the responsibility of the State of Israel. And the Palestinian Authority, only 4 years after the State of Israel ceded the last inch of territory that it had promised to give over to Palestinian rule, in 2009, the Palestinian Authority's Prime Minister announced that the Oslo Framework was now no longer binding, it was dead, and they would do whatever they pleased. And that means creating a Palestinian state in all of Judea and Samaria without regard for the Israeli presence in Area C. And they have been doing so ever since, with massive European support that violates not only the spirit, but the letter of international law as expressed in the Oslo Accords.
Has the situation got worse since the war?
The situation hasn't gotten worse since the war. It's gotten strange since the war. In the very first days of following October 7th, many of the Bedouin who had been squatting in these outposts in Area C began to worry that the State of Israel might begin to enforce the law, because there was such a concern that these outposts would attack Israelis, Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria or in Israel proper. The army sent massive forces to Judea and Samaria to maintain order, peace and quiet, and to make sure that there was no further escalation of the war. So many of these outposts, these squatters' camps, began to worry that perhaps the State of Israel would begin to enforce the law against them, as is its right. So they packed themselves up and took off, went back to wherever it was that they had come from. So in the case, for example, of Khirbet Zanuta, the Bedouin who were encamped there illegally, packed all of their belongings onto their own vehicles and went back to Dahariya, where they came from, where they have homes and they have families and they have clans and tribes, etc., etc. So the claim has been made by these same leftist NGOs that the people who were living in all of these communities were victims of settler violence. There's absolutely no proof that this is the case. Actually, quite the opposite is the case. Because of the massive IDF presence due to the war, there was much less violence in Judea and Samaria after the outbreak of the war. But these Bedouin understood that it was possible that the State of Israel might be jolted into action to enforce the law, to uphold international law, and so they relocated themselves of their own volition. Now there's a movement. They are trying to move back into the squatters' camps that they had abandoned, and the question is whether or not the State of Israel will allow them to do so, to reoccupy illegal squatters' camps at strategic locations all through Judea and Samaria that they themselves abandoned for fear of law enforcement.
Regavim have been to court about this. What's going to happen next?
We'll continue to go to court about this. We will force the State of Israel to behave like a grown-up government and to take responsibility for the territory that's been placed under its control, and more than anything else, to protect Israel's national interest and security. We can no longer pretend that illegal Palestinian Arab construction in Area C is just a nuisance or illegal behavior. It is a strategic threat that threatens the entire state of Israel's existence, the safety and security of every single Israeli. We have documented over 91,000 illegal Arab structures in Area C. We've documented 20,000 of these structures all along the buffer zone that is supposed to enable Israel to protect itself in the case of an Arab uprising from these very dangerous and hostile Palestinian Authority-controlled cities in Judea and Samaria. So it's time for the State of Israel to face the fact that its inaction and its failure to enforce the law all of these years has created a situation that is a massive threat to every single Israeli man, woman, and child, and to actually take responsibility and begin to enforce the law.
I guess after the massacre from October the 7th, where they broke through the fence and they came in and massacred over 1,000 people, is there a fear that something like this would happen again within this area?
Absolutely, but the fear is actually that it'll be much, much worse, because the border with Judea and Samaria is 10 times longer than the border between Israel and Gaza. So if this scenario unfolds in the worst possible way, the situation will be 10 times worse at least. Also remember that the Palestinian Authority has a fully armed, US-trained and funded army, which is in and of itself a breach of the Oslo Accords. They were allowed a certain number of police officers, and they've now developed into a massive army, fully equipped and trained by the United States. And they are already turning their guns against us. We actually did a study only in the last 3 years of over 80, probably many, many more than that, Palestinian Authority security officers, police officers that are paid by the United States of America to protect the state of Israel and the Palestinian population against terrorism. They have been actively involved in terrorism. So in addition to the Palestinian Authority paying salaries and stipends to murderers of Israelis and murderers of Jews, they're also actually training their own and encouraging their own salaried officers of their police forces to engage in the murder of Jews. We have a massive problem, and we have to face it.
What's your website for people who'd like to know more about the work that you're doing?
Regavim, Regavim.org.
Okay, Naomi, thank you very much.
My pleasure.